Jennifer Farber-Dulos was born into a very wealthy family in New York City on September 27, 1968. Her father, Hilliard Farber, ran the Chase Manhattan Bank's bond trading desk before starting his own brokerage firm called Hilliard Farber and Company. She was also a niece by marriage to the fashion designer Liz Claiborne. After high school, she earned a degree from Brown University and then a master's degree in writing from the New York University Tisch School of the Arts. While at Brown, she met Fotis Dulos, who was born in Turkey and grew up in Athens, Greece. He came to the United States in 1986 and graduated from Brown in 1989. At the time, Fotis was married, but it only lasted 4 years. After the divorce, he and Jennifer married and moved to Farmington, Connecticut. They eventually had 5 children, including 2 sets of twins. However, by 2012, the marriage was in trouble, and 5 years later, in 2017, 48-year-old Jennifer filed for divorce after learning that Fotis was having an affair with his colleague, Michelle Triconis, who was from Venezuela. While Michelle was born in Memphis, Tennessee, her parents were from Venezuela and they returned when she was 6 years old. After high school, she studied psychopedagogy and then specialized in offering equine-assisted therapies for children living with disabilities. She then moved to Argentina and remained there for around 10 years. While there, she gave birth to her daughter and eventually hosted a show on ESPN. Then in 2012, she moved to Miami, Florida to be closer to family. Unfortunately, she got sucked in by Fotis' narcissistic ways. As for Jennifer and Fotis, they began a nasty divorce and custody battle, and Jennifer wrote in the filing that she was sure the divorce would infuriate Fotis, and he would retaliate by trying to harm her in some way. After Jennifer and the kids moved to New Canaan, Connecticut, Fotis moved Michelle and her daughter into the home. After the move, Jennifer continued to earn a living writing for Patch.com. That same year, it was discovered that Fotis was in financial trouble. He had also bought a weapon and allegedly threatened to kidnap his children if Jennifer didn't agree to his terms in the divorce settlement. In 2017, Jennifer requested an emergency custody order, and by March, she was awarded sole physical custody after the judge learned Fotis had violated several court orders. He was given supervised visitation and his phone calls with the children were monitored. Before she was awarded custody, her father died, which led to her mother, Gloria, suing Fotis for the $1.7 million that he owed them. It appeared that everything was crashing down around Fotis and would eventually boil over to the point of no return. On May 24, 2019, Jennifer dropped the kids off at school and returned home. She was captured on a neighbor's security camera arriving back home at 8:05 a.m. After that, she was never seen alive again. After missing 2 appointments that day and being unable to find her, her 2 friends reported her missing. Everyone close to her knew that Fotis had threatened her life, which raised their concerns even further. When police arrived at her home, they found her Range Rover in the garage, which she typically used, but her other vehicle was missing. Inside the house, they found blood spatter on the floor, door, and on a wall in the garage, as well as on the outside of her SUV. There was also blood found in the kitchen, and DNA tests revealed that most of it belonged to Jennifer, but some of it also belonged to Fotis. They checked her home security footage and saw her Chevrolet Suburban leaving the home at around 10:25 that morning. They were able to determine that Fotis was the one driving. At 7:30 p.m. that evening, cameras caught Fotis and Michelle dumping garbage bags in multiple trash cans an hour away in Hartford. When investigators located the bags and looked inside, they found various pieces of clothing and cleaning items that were covered in Jennifer's blood. They then found the Suburban on the side of the road near Waveney Park, a little over 3 miles from her home. However, there was still no sign of Jennifer. Investigators knew Fotis was involved because they caught him on a neighbor's security camera riding toward Jennifer's house on a bicycle. They theorized that he entered the home and waited in the garage for her to return. After killing her, he loaded her remains in the Suburban and fled the scene. 8 days after her disappearance, on June 1st, Fotis and Michelle were arrested at a hotel in Avon, Connecticut, and charged with tampering with evidence and hindering prosecution. In September 2019, they were arrested again for tampering with evidence. And by October, Michelle and her 10-year-old daughter had moved out of Fotis' home in Farmington. Finally, in January of 2020, Fotis was arrested and charged with kidnapping and capital murder. Michelle was also arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Fotis's friend and former attorney Kent Douglas Mooney was arrested as well that day and also charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Mooney's wife accused him of sexual assault and the two separated. She then went to the police and said she feared Fotis and Mooney were planning to kill her. After Jennifer disappeared, a shallow grave was discovered at a secluded property that Mooney owned. When authorities searched the grave in August of 2019, they found 2 bags of lime and a blue tarp, but no remains were found. Even though Fotis' bond was set at $6 million, he was still able to post bail. Then on January 28th, after missing an emergency bond hearing, he was found in critical condition after trying to take his own life with carbon monoxide poisoning from his SUV's exhaust pipe. He was then rushed to Jacobi Medical Center and underwent hyperbaric oxygen therapy, but it was too late and he didn't survive. Unfortunately, he might have been the only person who knew what really happened to Jennifer. In January 2021, authorities searched a property owned by Fotis Real Estate Company, but sadly nothing was found. In May 2021, a domestic violence bill was signed into law named Jennifer's Law, which expands the definition of the crime to include coercive control. As for Michelle, she could be seen pleading with investigators during her interrogation, saying she had nothing to do with Jennifer's disappearance and didn't know what was in the bags they were dumping. During her trial in May of 2024, prosecutors told the jurors that Michelle was in on the plot to murder Jennifer and had answered his phone, which he left behind that day, in order to provide him with an alibi. The jury agreed, and she was found guilty of conspiring with Fotis to kill Jennifer and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. As for Jennifer, she has since been declared legally dead, but as of September 2024, her remains have not been found. Jalisha Baddies was born on April 26, 2014 to Navisha Jones and Julius Baddies. When she was born, her mother, Navisha, was under investigation by CPS for alleged abuse and neglect of her 4 children. Because of that, at only 5 days old, Jalisha was placed in the care of her grandmother, Yolanda Davis, in Brooklyn, New York. Sadly, Jalisha spent the rest of her life in fear, with Yolanda being the only one who ever tried to keep her safe. The next 6 years were a constant battle for Yolanda, who was trying to maintain custody of Jalisha. During that time, she described her as a great child with neat handwriting. She loved Target and Walmart and was also an usher at church. Over the years, the court slowly forced Jalisha back into her biological mother, Navisha's life. Navisha lived in the Bronx and had custody of some of her children. The first contact was under supervised visitation, but by 2020, the court was having Jalisha stay the weekend. This was hard for Yolanda because she witnessed Jalisha crying in the corner when she was made to visit her mother at the supervised visitations. The caseworker also saw it but said there was nothing she could do. In January 2020, a therapist noted, and I quote, "Jalisha presents discomfort when the subject of mom is being introduced." This made it much more terrifying for Yolanda when Navisha didn't return her after a weekend visit at the start of the pandemic. Over the next year and a half, neighbors were telling Jalisha's biological father, Julius, that they were seeing Jalisha with black eyes and that she had to wear sunglasses to another child's birthday party. Then on August 10th, Navisha called 911 after pressure from a family member because Jalisha was unconscious in the apartment. When paramedics arrived, Navisha told them that Jalisha had started vomiting and then passed out. Sadly, by the time they got to her, she was already dead. An autopsy discovered many old and new injuries, but her ultimate cause of death was blunt force abdominal trauma. Sadly, Yolanda and Julius had to identify Jalisha's remains via photographs. Investigators questioned the oldest sibling, 17-year-old Paul Fine Jr., and were shocked when he confessed to punching her in the face 8 times because she allegedly kept getting snacks from the kitchen. However, it was her mother, Navisha, who was doing the majority of the abuse. Between August 8, 2021 and August 10, 2021, Jalisha was repeatedly beaten until her little body finally gave out. However, Navisha lied and told investigators that Jalisha had fallen down the stairs. She then vomited and urinated on herself in the middle of the night. Investigators were able to prove that stairs could not have caused her injuries. When presented with this, Paul finally confessed that they had assaulted her body all over during those horrible 3 days. It was also discovered that Jalisha had been sexually assaulted, which appeared to have taken place as she was already dying. Navisha and Paul were then charged with her murder. Unfortunately, both their trials have been delayed, but Navisha's has finally been scheduled for September 9, 2024. As for Paul, his trial date has not been set. Marie-Nicole Rainville was born in Quebec, Canada on April 14, 1938. In 2009, 71-year-old Marie was living in a condo with her husband of 49 years, Jacques Delisle. Marie had unfortunately become partially paralyzed following a stroke she suffered in April of 2007. The hospital stay lasted for months, and the brain damage she suffered caused her to lose the ability to speak foreign languages, play bridge, and do puzzles. Marie had begun expressing thoughts of taking her own life because she didn't want to be a burden on her family. She then broke her hip and now needed around-the-clock care and was sent back to her condo where Jacques would be her sole caretaker. This upset her sister Pauline, who didn't care for Jacques because she felt he was very unfriendly. November 12, 2009, Jacques called 911 and told the dispatcher that his wife had killed herself and that there was a revolver next to her. The dispatcher then asked if she had talked about taking her own life, to which he responded, and I quote, "It's a long story." When officers originally questioned Jacques, he told them that he had left the .22 revolver on a table and Marie had found it. However, he later changed his story and said that Marie had convinced him to load the weapon and bring it to her so she could end her life. After giving her the weapon, he left the home for an hour and then returned to find her dead. Unfortunately, during the autopsy, the pathologist failed to photograph the brain or take any samples that Jacques' lawyers would later argue would have helped them prove she took her own life. 7 months after Marie's death, he was arrested and charged with her murder. At that point, it took some time to find a judge and prosecutor who didn't know Jacques because he had served as a judge for the Crown and knew a lot of people, and a lot of people knew him. Once that was settled and the trial began in May of 2012, prosecutors argued that Jacques murdered Marie to avoid a costly divorce and because he wanted to move in his former secretary, Joanne Plamondon. The two had been having an affair for months, and she testified that she did indeed plan to move in with Jacques right before he was arrested. 57-year-old Joanne first began working with Jacques as a legal secretary in 1983. She then followed him as he went from the Quebec Superior Court to the Quebec Court of Appeal in 1992. Prosecutors also pointed out that the black smudge of gunshot residue on Marie's hand was in a bizarre spot outside the palm. The defense countered the argument by saying she must have been awkwardly gripping the gun when the trigger was pulled. In the end, on June 14, 2012, 77-year-old Jacques was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. His family was very distraught after the verdict was read, and his son even begged the judge for a chance to hug his father, but was denied. Jacques became the first Canadian member of the judiciary ever to stand trial for murder. However, he wouldn't serve his entire sentence and was released in 2021 after Federal Justice Minister David Lametti ordered a retrial, citing that a miscarriage of justice had likely occurred. He was then given the choice of a plea deal, which he accepted. This gave him a manslaughter charge, and he only had to serve 1 additional day in prison. In total, he served 8 years and 311 days behind bars. On August 10, 2024, he died of natural causes at the age of 89. Alyssa Lamech was born in Rockford, Illinois on May 10, 1993 to parents Gustav and Deanna. After graduating from Oregon High School in 2011, she attended a few different colleges before graduating from the Swedish-American EMS paramedic class in 2020. She then got a job as an EMT with the Trace Ambulance Service in Tinley Park and also worked for Sullivan's Foods. 27-year-old Melissa was known for her unique smile and her love of food and naps. In her off time, she would host trivia nights for Pub Trivia USA. She was dating 36-year-old Matthew Plote, who worked as a firefighter, and they were expecting a child together. However, as the birth of their child neared, a horrible tragedy would occur. On November 25, 2020, the day before Thanksgiving, Melissa was already on maternity leave and set to give birth any minute to a son they planned to name Barrett. When firefighters responded to reports of smoke coming out of her home. When they arrived, they found the house filled with heavy smoke and the smoke detectors going off. When they made their way inside, they sadly found Melissa dead on the kitchen floor. Sadly, Barrett did not survive. Fellow firefighters noticed something strange at the scene. The man who just lost his girlfriend and unborn child was seemingly calm and went right back to work like nothing had ever happened. When investigators began thinking that Melissa's death was not the result of an accidental fire but possibly murder, they brought Plowitt in for questioning. He admitted to being at her home on the day of the fire but denied killing her. However, an autopsy would prove otherwise. It turns out that Melissa's cause of death was strangulation, and she was dead before the fire engulfed the house. Over a year later, in March of 2022, he was arrested and charged with the murder of Melissa and their unborn son Barrett. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder, 60 years for the intentional homicide of an unborn child, and 15 years for residential arson. As for a motive, it's thought that he didn't want to be attached to Melissa for the rest of her life and thought of their relationship as more of a friends with benefits situation. On October 13, 1987, in Riverside, California, a man digging through a dumpster looking for recyclables made a horrifying discovery. Inside a blanket was the remains of a baby girl partially clothed. It was estimated that the infant had been there for about 12 hours before being discovered and was about a week old at the time of her death. An autopsy determined that the manner of death was homicide. Sadly, the case would go unsolved for the next 37 years, and she would become known as the Riverside Baby Jane Doe. In 2020, the case was reopened, and they enlisted the help of Othram. Using DNA and their genetic genealogy team, they were able to provide investigators with a potential suspect, 55-year-old Melissa Jane Allen Avila, who would have been 19 when she gave birth. Investigators tracked her down to Shelby, North Carolina, and were able to confirm she was indeed the mother of Riverside Baby Jane Doe. She was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder and extradited back to California. After being booked into jail, her bail was set at $1.1 million. However, 2 days later, on August 7, 2024, the judge released her and set a date for her to return to court on September 9, 2024. The funds for the advanced DNA testing from Othram were provided by Season of Justice, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing funding for investigative agencies and families to help solve cold cases and bring resolution to those impacted by unsolved violent crimes. If you would like to choose a case to help fund, even if it's just a few dollars, head on over to DNASolves.com. There are sadly many cases to choose from, but with your help, it can speed up the process of getting families some much-needed closure. Muna Pandey was born in Nepal on August 24, 2003, the only child of single mother Anita Pandey Adhikari. In 2021, 18-year-old Muna left her mother in Nepal and moved to Houston, Texas to attend college. She initially lived with her friend who was also from Nepal, but later got an apartment of her own. She was described as a very kind and intelligent individual with a bubbly personality and an infectious laugh. In August 2024, 21-year-old Muna was a nursing student at the Houston Community College and employed at a local phone store. Unfortunately, the previous year, a man had begun stalking her. Terrified, she had a friend install a security camera above the door to her apartment. On August 24th, she had plans to go out with friends for her birthday, but never showed up. Her friends had been texting her that day, but became concerned when she suddenly stopped responding. The following night, the leasing manager at her apartment complex received a chilling call from someone who said they had a dead body in one of the units, but provided no further details. They most likely thought it was a joke and never notified the police. On Monday, August 27th, 3 days after her disappearance, friends went to her apartment to check on her. Upon entering, they found her dead inside and quickly called 911. When police arrived, they found she had been shot multiple times. A friend then told them about the security camera he installed for her, which would be vital in solving the case. In the footage, An unknown older man can be seen standing outside her door with a gun by his side. Mona approaches and can be heard asking what he plans on doing. He then racked the slide of the gun and asked her to open the door, which she eventually agreed to do. Once inside, he shot her to death before leaving with her purse. Investigators released the footage to the public, and the man was identified as 51-year-old Bobby Singh Shea. He was initially identified by the owner of a restaurant that Mona used to work at. According to the owner, Shea and he were in communication to start a business after he became a regular patron of the restaurant. He was even able to provide police with his driver's license information and phone number. The second identification came from a female who instantly recognized him from the website Sugar Daddy, a dating site meant for successful men who are financially well off and can provide the women they date with very nice gifts. On August 29th, not long after identifying him, he was arrested during a traffic stop and charged with Mona's murder. As of September 2024, the outcome of his case is still pending. Rachel Nicoletta Anderson was born to parents Bill and Trish Anderson on January 28, 1994 in Warren, Ohio. Rachel was involved in many activities in high school, including the band, volleyball, and soccer. After graduating from Warren G. Harding High School, she made plans to become a funeral director, and in 2016, she earned a Bachelor of Science from the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science. While earning her degree, she worked at a funeral home and was a member of the Ohio Funeral Directors Association. After graduation in May of 2017, she moved to Columbus, Ohio to work as an apprentice at the Shaw Davis Funeral Home and was almost at the end when a horrible tragedy occurred. During the last 8 months in Columbus, she mainly hung out with her friend from high school, Jonathan Kennedy, and his wife. On January 28, 2018, the night of her 24th birthday, Jonathan and his wife had a party for her. Her 20-year-old brother, John Anderson, had come into town for the weekend and planned to head back to Warren, Ohio after the party was over. However, when he left, he accidentally took her key with him. So she went and grabbed the spare from Jonathan and his wife and returned to her apartment. Sadly, that was the last time they would ever see her alive. The following day, when she strangely failed to show up for work, the supervisor at the funeral home asked a coworker to run by and check on her. However, when he knocked on the door, there was no answer. So he went to the office and explained the situation. The manager then contacted the police and they gave permission to search the apartment. However, nothing was found after a quick walkthrough. At this point, Jonathan had also become worried after not being able to get in touch with her, so he used one of the spare keys she had given him and entered the apartment. Once inside, he noticed that her bedroom was in disarray as if a struggle had taken place. He then tried to open her closet door, but something was preventing him from opening it. After forcing it open, he shockingly found Rachel's body hogtied and partially nude. Turns out the door was being held by a cord from an electric blanket that was also attached to Rachel. She had sadly been beaten, strangled, sexually assaulted, and stabbed to death. The murder weapon, a 9-inch steak knife, was found by her mother 2 weeks after the murder in a box in her apartment. Thankfully, they were able to collect biological DNA. Missing from the apartment was Rachel's debit and credit cards, along with her vehicle. It wouldn't take investigators long to identify the suspect as Anthony Pardon, a career criminal who had spent 33 years of his life in prison. Once they had a name, they were able to track his cell phone and it showed he was at Rachel's apartment from 7:59 to 9:25 p.m. on the night she was murdered. They also obtained surveillance footage of Pardon and his sister using her debit card. They also discovered that a homeless man by the name of Anthony Sleets had been using her credit card. When questioned, he said that Pardon had given him the card to use. Investigators were even able to obtain video of both Pardon and Sleets driving Rachel's car hours after she was murdered. However, before they could question Pardon, Sleets died. It turns out that when Rachel returned home, she walked in on Pardon burglarizing her apartment. He then put her through hell before finally killing her. Pardon has spent years in prison for numerous crimes, including the sexual assault of an 8-year-old girl in March of 1979 when he was only 14. A year later, while in foster care, he did the same thing to a 9-month-old. When he was 16, he sexually assaulted another 8-year-old. Next, he assaulted his girlfriend's mother before kidnapping her and trying to kill her. Thankfully, a good Samaritan intervened and saved her life. At only 17 years old, he was convicted of aggravated robbery, sexual assault, and attempted murder and sentenced to 5 to 25 years in prison. He would only serve 24 years of that and was released in November of 2006. He then moved to Georgia and applied for a job under a false name. In 2007, he was arrested and charged with forgery and failure to register as a sex offender. After being convicted of that crime, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison, plus 20 years of probation, and required to wear a GPS ankle monitor. In 2017, he was released from prison again and returned to Ohio. The judge requested he be given an ankle monitor in Ohio, but they never did. In August of that year, he was caught with a prostitute. Then, on January 26, 2018, he was caught driving without a license. When he was pulled over, he was found with a pocket knife, a kitchen knife, and a pellet gun. For some reason, the officer didn't arrest him, even though he wasn't supposed to have those items in his possession. Sadly, Rachel was murdered the following day. On February 9, 2018, Pardon was arrested and held on a $5 million bond. He pleaded not guilty on all charges and refused to participate in court hearings. In December 2019, he wrote a letter to WBNS-TV claiming he didn't kill Rachel or anyone for that matter and blamed his past for his arrest. A month later, he dismissed his attorneys Isabella Dixon and Larry Thomas because he wanted to represent himself. He then changed his mind. In the end, he was found guilty on all charges. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder and the sexual assault. For the aggravated robbery charges and kidnapping, he was given another 63 years. Thankfully, he will die in prison and never be able to hurt another innocent person ever again. Terry Blair Becker was born on May 9, 1955 and grew up in Casper, Wyoming with her parents, sister, and brother. She graduated from Kelly Walsh High School and worked at a local newspaper called the Golden Bell Press. After graduating, she moved to Denver, Colorado, where she stayed with friends and family. Terry was described as a free spirit who lived life on the edge. She was never known to meet a stranger and could hold a conversation with just about anyone. She also enjoyed painting and listening to her favorite bands, Three Dog Night and Steppenwolf. On December 4, 1975, 20-year-old Terry decided to hitchhike to Brighton, Colorado to visit her boyfriend who was in jail. After visiting with him, she began hitchhiking home but never arrived. 2 days later, on December 6th, 2 men on motorcycles found her body in a field 10 miles north of Denver in Westminster, Colorado. An autopsy determined she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Unfortunately, her case would remain unsolved for the next 48 years. While investigators worked the case over the years, it wasn't until 2013 that they had their first big break when the killer's DNA that had been uploaded to Cody's had a hit. It matched another sexual assault case and murder from 1991 that occurred in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, they didn't have a suspect in their case either, but if they could identify him, it would solve both cases. In 2018, investigators enlisted the help of Parabon Nanolabs and Solved by DNA, a local forensic genetic genealogist company in Denver. With the leads they provided, investigators were able to identify the suspect as Thomas Martin Elliott. Elliott was a career criminal who had spent much of his life in and out of prison. In 1975, not long before he murdered Terry, he was arrested for a burglary in Lakewood. He was convicted of that burglary and spent 6 years in prison. He was eventually released in Las Vegas in 1981. He then continued his crime spree and was arrested again for sexually assaulting a child. For that crime, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After being released in 1991, he committed the murder that ultimately led to the connection in Cody's. He then took his own life on October 30, 1991 at the age of 40. Once he was identified, Las Vegas Metro Police obtained consent and exhumed his body. The DNA was sent off for analysis and confirmed the match. While justice was never served, Terry's brother David is thankful to finally have some long-awaited answers. Amina Zalia Gathers was born on June 22, 2023 to parents Sandy Gathers and Sarah Constance Shakari Taylor in Latson, South Carolina. Unfortunately, their home was a house of horrors, and poor little Amina would never make it to her first birthday. On May 15, 2024, Sandy called 911 to report that 10-month-old Amina was unconscious. He said he arrived home from work at 3 p.m. to find her face down on the edge of the bed with Sarah sleeping next to her. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital while trying to revive her, but it was too late and she was pronounced dead on arrival. They initially weren't able to determine her cause of death because there were no apparent injuries found during the autopsy. However, when the toxicology report came back, it showed Amina had a large amount of fentanyl in her system, and that was determined to be the cause of death. In order to determine how she ingested fentanyl, officers back at the scene collected Amina's baby bottles, formula, a pacifier, and a $1 bill that was found with a powdery substance on it. When those items were tested, the pacifier and a bottle of formula tested positive for fentanyl. Sarah admitted to previously using fentanyl and admitted to knowing the dangers of it, but refused to provide a blood sample to determine if she had used it that day. While investigators were at the home, they also found evidence of dogfighting, including dogs tethered to the ground and caged pit bulls. In total, 14 dogs were found on the property. It turns out that Sandy and Sarah were running a dog fighting operation under the guise of an unlicensed kennel. 39-year-old Sarah was arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse, 3 counts of conspiracy, 3 counts of animal fighting or baiting, and 1 count of ill treatment of animals. 41-year-old Sandy was also arrested and charged with 4 counts of animal fighting or baiting, 5 counts of ill treatment of animals, 9 counts of conspiracy, a count of hindering an officer, and 15 counts of being a violent criminal in possession of a firearm. However, at this time, he has not been charged in his daughter's death. And as of September 2024, their cases are still pending. Victor Marshall Patterson was born on August 19, 2021 to parents Gabrielle Marshall and Shane Patterson in Phoenix, Arizona. Before he was born, both his parents were investigated at least twice by the Arizona Department of Child Safety after another one of their children showed up to school multiple days in a row in 2019, smelling like marijuana. DCS investigated the allegations but said they found no evidence to support the claims and closed the case. A few weeks later, on January 30, 2020, DCS received another report. This time, Shane and Gabrielle were being accused of having drug paraphernalia, weapons, and illegal drugs in the home. The allegations also claimed that the house was beyond filthy and being neglected. Once again, DCS claimed they found no evidence to support the allegations and once again closed the case after offering the family some in-home services. Fast forward to 5 days after the birth of Emery when DCS received another report that he was born with methadone and fentanyl in his system. Since there was proof of this, DCS required them to participate in an in-home service. After that, just like all the other times, the case was closed. Over the next 13 months, Emery would spend his days allegedly being abused and neglected. Then on September 19, 2022, Gabrielle called her friend and said that Emery had gotten into some of her pills and was unresponsive and she needed some Narcan. However, the friend told her multiple times to call 911, which she finally did. When EMTs arrived, she told them that Emery had gotten into her stash of opiates. They quickly administered Narcan to reverse the effects, but sadly it was too late and he died from the overdose. A toxicology report would later reveal that he had ingested fentanyl. A neighbor would later tell police that she heard Gabriel screaming, "My God! Oh my God!" No, multiple times. 2 months after his death, Gabriel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and child abuse. In the end, she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 11.5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. Alexander Layman Sidney Woodworth, who went by Alex, was born on January 1, 1994, to John and Kimberly in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. Alex was described as an intelligent and deeply curious individual who was always passionate about learning. In 2017, he earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy and biology and had dreams of pursuing a master's degree in philosophy at the University of Oregon. At 24, Alex lived in the small town of Osceola, Wisconsin, with a roommate. He was always known for his friendly demeanor and love for deep philosophical discussions, and he had a unique habit of studying philosophy even at local bars. He worked as a barista at Racy DeLong's Coffee Lounge in Eau Claire, and also as a substitute teacher, aiming to one day become a professor. In late 2017, Alex met 22-year-old Monica Kay, who had recently changed her name to Ezra McCandless after moving to Eau Claire. Monica was known for her spontaneity and charm, traits that intrigued Alex when she approached him at the coffee shop to chat about his studies. At the time, Monica was dating Jason Mangle, a National Guard medic. The trio, along with Jason's best friend, John Hansen, developed a complicated friendship. However, behind the scenes, Monica was involved with all three men, creating a tangled web of secrets and betrayal. In February 2018, while Jason was away for military training, Monica accused his best friend, John Hansen, of sexual assault. Jason, determined to support her, reported the alleged assault to the police, prompting an investigation. During the investigation, Alex revealed that he had been intimate with Monica during Jason's absence and that Monica had admitted to willingly being with John. This disclosure complicated her claim of assault and led to tension among the four. When Jason returned, he discovered Monica's infidelity through messages on her phone. An argument involving Alex, Jason, and John ensued at the coffee shop and was witnessed by several patrons. The fallout was significant. Monica, feeling exposed and rejected, moved back to her mother's house in Stanley, Wisconsin. Despite her own actions, she blamed Alex for the end of her relationship with Jason and was determined to win Jason back. On March 22, 2018, Monica returned to Eau Claire, surprising Jason at Racy DeLong's Coffee Lounge. Her unannounced visit seemed odd, especially after exchanging hundreds of messages with Jason the previous night without mentioning her plans. She claimed she was there to show Alex some of her writings. Jason's suspicion was piqued, and he followed her to Alex's house where an uncomfortable confrontation unfolded. Jason, observing Monica's car outside, paced for 45 minutes before entering. The tension was palpable, and Jason suggested they continue their conversation in a public place. The trio left the house only to be interrupted by the arrival of two police cruisers. A passerby had reported Jason's pacing, prompting a welfare check. The dash cam footage showed Alex talking to an officer beside Monica's car, while Jason explained his concerns to another officer. After the police left, Jason spoke briefly to Alex and Monica before leaving on his bicycle. Sadly, that was the last time he would see Alex alive. 3 hours later, a dairy farmer near Eau Claire was startled when a young woman, barefoot and covered in blood and mud, knocked on his door. It was Monica, visibly shaken, claiming she had been attacked in her car. The farmer called 911 and Monica, who had boy carved into her arm, was taken to the hospital. She claimed her attacker had tried to sexually assault her and carved the word as a taunt. The next day, investigators searching the area found Alex's body in the back seat of Monica's 2003 Chevy Impala, abandoned and stuck on a muddy dirt road. He had suffered 16 stab wounds to the head, neck, torso, and groin. Blood evidence suggested the initial attack occurred outside the car, and Alex had tried to climb into the back seat as he bled. Monica's story began to unravel. At the hospital, a doctor determined that the wounds on her arm were self-inflicted. When interviewed again, she claimed Alex had attacked her and that she had grabbed the knife in self-defense. However, forensic evidence contradicted her version of events. Alex had no defensive wounds and most of the blood was outside the car, indicating a surprise attack. Additionally, it was implausible for Alex, who was right-handed, to have carved the word boy on her arm due to the position they were sitting in the vehicle. Trial witnesses testified about Monica's erratic behavior and her desire to win Jason back. Dashcam footage from the day of the murder showed Alex and Monica together, seemingly calm, hours before the brutal killing. Her father testified that he had given Monica the knife found at the scene for protection, and DNA evidence confirmed that both her and Alex's blood were on it. Monica admitted to carving the word into her own arm, though she couldn't explain why she did it. Throughout the trial, she displayed little emotion. Witnesses described her as attention-seeking, a behavior that was evident during the trial as she appeared excited and animated, particularly when Jason was present. Monica stated she changed her name to Ezra McCandless to honor the protagonist of Into the Wild, Christopher McCandless. However, it was clear she only knew the movie and not the actual story behind it. In the end, the jury found Monica guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years. Yanni Coleman was born on October 2, 1967 in Elkhart, Indiana. She graduated with a degree in teaching and dedicated her life to educating young minds. In addition to her teaching career, Yanni joined the Navy, where she served as a certified military police officer and reservist. Beyond her professional achievements, she was a devoted mother who adopted 3 daughters from foster care. By the age of 40, Yanni was living in Atlanta and was a cherished elementary school teacher in DeKalb County. Her loved ones described her as a caring, energetic, and strong woman who was excited to soon become a grandmother. On the evening of July 18, 2008, went to a mall in Gwinnett County, just outside of Atlanta, to pick up one of her daughters. Around 9 p.m., while sitting in her gold Dodge Stratus and scrolling through her phone, Yanni unknowingly encountered a dangerous individual. A man walked out of a nearby gas station and, without any apparent reason, approached her car. Witnesses later recounted seeing him open her car door, shoot her, and drag her from the vehicle before speeding away in it. Yanni was rushed to the hospital, but the injuries were too severe and she tragically passed away. Witness accounts described the suspect as a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, between the ages of 40 and 50, and wearing a green and white shirt. Police began an immediate search for her car, hoping it would lead them to the killer. 12 hours after the attack, Janah's car was discovered 40 miles away in a Forest Park Diner parking lot. The car was processed for fingerprints and DNA evidence, and detectives found a cigarette but inside. This was a critical clue because Janah did not smoke or allow smoking in her car. The DNA evidence was sent for comparison with local and federal databases. Investigators turned to surveillance footage from the gas station across from the crime scene. The footage showed a man who matched the suspect's description buying alcohol and a pack of Bronson Light Long cigarettes, the same brand found in Yanni's car. Despite showing the video to Yanni's family and local business owners, police hit a dead end until DNA from the cigarette but came back as a match to Donald Eugene Smith, a man with a criminal record that included armed robbery. Further investigation revealed that Donald had recently worked at a local restaurant, Legal Seafoods, where employees recognized him from the surveillance video. His phone records also placed him near the crime scene on the night of the murder. When police confronted Donald, he denied any involvement, claiming he was not the man in the video and did not own a shirt like the suspects. But then came a twist, revealed that he had an identical twin brother, Ronald Smith. Identical twins share the same DNA, but not the same fingerprints. Donald's parents were brought in and identified Ronald as the person in the surveillance footage. On February 6, 2010, Ronald was arrested and both brothers' fingerprints were sent to the crime lab for comparison. During Ronald's interview, he refused to cooperate, but did agree to smoke a cigarette during the interrogation, the same Bronson Light brand found in Jenna's car. Phone records showed that Ronald's phone had pinged off towers near the crime scene that night. Confronted with mounting evidence, Ronald eventually confessed. He claimed he had been drinking and needed a vehicle, and when he attempted to carjack Jenna, the gun accidentally went off as she pleaded for her life. However, a witness said he used a derogatory term against her before pulling the trigger, which contradicted his story of an accidental shooting. Ronald was charged with felony murder, carjacking, and possession of a firearm. He pleaded not guilty, but was convicted on October 6, 2012. He was sentenced to life in prison for murder, plus an additional 25 years for carjacking and firearm possession. Janiyah Coleman, a beloved teacher, soldier, and mother, was taken far too soon. As of November 2024, Ronald remains behind bars, serving his sentence for the senseless crime that ended her life. James was born in May 2002 in Australia to parents Peter and Jamie. From an early age, she was known for her bright and energetic spirit. In 2020, she graduated from Danebank Anglican School for Girls and was described as bubbly, full of life, and deeply connected to her family, especially her parents and brother Max. At 21, Lily was living in Sans Souci, New South Wales, and balancing a busy life that included her part-time role as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. It was there that she met 24-year-old Paul Tyson, a cricket and hockey coach and a former student of the school. Initially, Lily and Paul developed a friendly rapport and began spending time together. But after about a week, she realized she only wanted to be friends, and Paul seemed to accept this. At least that's what she thought. Lily would have no idea that Paul was hiding dark and dangerous tendencies beneath his laid-back exterior. On October 25, 2023, Lily took the train to St. Andrew's Cathedral Academy in Sydney for what she expected to be an ordinary evening of coaching. However, what happened next was captured on CCTV. Around 8:30 p.m., Lily arrived at the school, unpacked her things, and headed to the bathroom to change into her water polo uniform. Unbeknownst to her, Paul was following closely behind. He cornered her in one of the stalls and viciously attacked her with a hammer, repeatedly striking her until she succumbed to her injuries. Paul then stayed with her lifeless body for over an hour, using her phone to send messages to her father before fleeing the scene. Those messages that appeared to come from Lily read, "Don't ask why or call. Please come to the school now and pick me up." When he asked if she was okay, he received another message. "All good. Just come. Trouble." Paul was using Lily's phone in an attempt to lure Jamie to the school so that he would discover his daughter's body. While Jamie rushed to the school, Lily's mother began contacting her daughter's friends, including Paul, to see if they knew what was happening, and everyone responded except for Paul. Jamie arrived at the school and texted Lily once again, this time to ask where she was, but received no reply. Once inside, he found her belongings, but still couldn't find her. Meanwhile, after fleeing the school, Paul was seen on CCTV outside the home of one of Lily's close friends, pacing back and forth. He disposed of the hammer in a bin at Diamond Bay Reserve around 8:47 p.m. and left the area an hour later. By 11:30 p.m., he made an anonymous call to authorities, informing them that Lily's body could be found in the gym bathroom before abruptly hanging up. Police rushed to the school, and Jamie, who was still there, was informed by police that they were looking for Lily, who was now missing. It wouldn't take long to discover her body in the girls' bathroom. Jamie was then notified and had to break the devastating news to his wife and son that their beloved Lily was never coming home. The next day, officers discovered Paul's backpack, which contained his belongings and the hammer used in the attack. Police were unfortunately unable to locate Paul. Days later, his body was discovered at the base of a cliff, and it was apparent he had taken his own life. A forensic psychologist later suggested that Paul likely exhibited severe narcissistic traits, leading him to react violently to rejection. A former girlfriend came forward and described his erratic behavior during their breakup, reinforcing this theory. Lily James was a bright and loving young woman whose life was cut tragically short. As of November 2024, her family and community continue to mourn her loss, hoping to raise awareness about the warning signs of dangerous behavior and the importance of protecting those who may be at risk. Meredith Emily Lane was born on December 12, 1989 in Chambly, to parents Jean and Debbie Lane. After high school, she enrolled at the University of Texas in Dallas, and that's where she met fellow student Spencer Height. The two lived in the same apartment complex and quickly began dating. Meanwhile, Meredith graduated and secured a position at the Coca-Cola Company where she worked in various customer-facing roles, eventually becoming a merchandising supervisor. Then in September 2011, She and Spencer married and later exchanged vows again on a Caribbean cruise, surrounded by friends including James Dunlop, Spencer's best man, and Ryan Morgan, one of his groomsmen. Unfortunately, the couple's relationship began to deteriorate when Spencer lost his job doing contract work for Texas Instruments around the time they bought their first home. His excessive drinking worsened, causing further strain in their marriage. Meredith's parents noticed his troubling behavior, which included isolating himself in his room to drink while they visited. Initially known for his free-spirited nature, love of dogs, art, and Renaissance fairs, Spencer's darker side soon emerged. His drinking escalated, and he developed a short temper and eventually turned abusive. Meredith tried to help him and encouraged him to seek treatment, but he refused. Their marriage crumbled, and in 2017, Meredith asked Spencer to move out. He went to live with his friend and best man, James Dunlop. For months later, Meredith officially filed for divorce, while Spencer grew increasingly resentful, expressing his anger on social media with posts that disparaged her. Despite their turbulent history, the separation was still difficult for Meredith, as she tried to focus on reclaiming her independence. Spencer, on the other hand, wallowed in self-pity and allowed his anger to fester. At age 27, Meredith was living in Plano, Texas, where she had a love for Renaissance festivals and was known for attending them in full costume. She lived by the motto, "Love your life and give love to everyone on your journey." Unfortunately, Spencer did not express the same sentiment. On September 10th, Spencer's rage reached its peak. Already intoxicated, he walked into a local bar where he was a regular and began drinking heavily. Bartender Lindsay Glass noted his strange behavior and became concerned when he started spinning a large knife on the bar and showing off a gun. Spencer began muttering about needing to put someone in their place and mentioned having dirty work to do. Lindsay sent her manager Timothy Banks a text message describing Spencer as psycho and drunk. Although the manager eventually made Spencer put the weapons in his car, the warning signs were clear. At 7:37 p.m., Spencer left the bar, followed by Lindsay and Timothy, who watched as he got into his vehicle and drove off. They then called 911 at 8:03 p.m. to report that Spencer was intoxicated and had a firearm. Meredith, meanwhile, was hosting her first solo gathering at her home, a Sunday cookout with friends, to watch the Dallas Cowboys game. Guests included her close friends, Maya Bass, Olivia Daffner, James Dunlop, Daryl Hawkins, Anthony Cross, Ryan Morgan, Caleb Edwards, and others, arrived at Meredith's home, interrupting the peaceful gathering. A neighbor would later recount hearing Meredith say, "Do you really have to do this?" Spencer then entered the house and opened fire. Police arrived around the same time, heard the gunfire, rushed into the home and shot and killed Spencer. When all was said and done, Meredith, Spencer, and 7 of her friends were dead. An investigation revealed Spencer had brought multiple weapons, including a pistol, a semi-automatic rifle, and a knife. Further searches of his apartment uncovered more firearms and ammunition. It became clear that Spencer had planned the attack, targeting even close friends like James Dunlop and Ryan Morgan, who had once stood by him during better times. 19 months after the massacre, the bartender, Lindsay Glass, was charged with a misdemeanor for serving alcohol to an intoxicated person. Her defense highlighted that she had raised concerns, contacted her manager, and even followed Spencer to his car. Ultimately, the charges were dismissed. Meredith Emily Lane's life was cut short in a senseless act of violence, but her legacy as a beacon of love and kindness continues to be remembered by all who knew her. Thomas Meixner, who went by Tom, was born on July 29, 1970 and raised in Rockville, Maryland. Tom was described as an intelligent and kind individual who was always dedicated to his family and his faith. He was known for being a world-renowned scholar and mentor, and was deeply admired in both his professional and personal life. At 52 years old, Tom was living in Arizona, where he held the distinguished position of professor and department head of hydrology and atmospheric sciences at the University of Arizona. He and his wife Kathleen shared a life enriched by their children. Tom was a man of many passions. He was an Eagle Scout and later a Scoutmaster for his son's Boy Scout troop. He also had a love for the outdoors, enjoying gardening, hiking, camping, and skiing, a cherished tradition in the Meixner family. Tom's academic achievements were impressive. He earned bachelor's degrees in the history of science and soil and water conservation from the University of Maryland College Park in 1992. His thirst for knowledge took him to the University of Arizona, where he completed his PhD in hydrology and water resources in 1999. After a stint as an assistant professor at the University of California, Riverside from 1999 to 2004, he returned to the University of Arizona in 2005, where he eventually became a full-time professor in 2015 and department head in 2019. His research and expertise in water conservation and desert water issues solidified his reputation as a brilliant scientist. However, beneath the surface of his academic environment, tensions were brewing. In 2021, a student named Murad Dervish became enraged after receiving a poor grade. This sparked a wave of harassment and threats directed toward faculty at the school. Some of these threats were anti-Semitic, with Dervish accusing Tom and others of being part of a supposed conspiracy against him, even though Tom was raised Roman Catholic. Dervish was eventually expelled and barred from campus, but that did not stop his dangerous fixation. On October 5, 2022, the day took a tragic turn. Dervish, having purchased an automatic rifle and ammunition, entered the Harsbarger building where Tom was located shortly before 2 p.m. With calculated intent, he chased Tom down a hallway and into a classroom where he mercilessly shot him multiple times. After the attack, he fled the scene in a van, initiating a pursuit that ended 3 hours later on Highway 85 as he attempted to flee into Mexico. Police used a pit maneuver to stop the vehicle and were able to take him into custody. He was then arrested and charged with Tom's murder. During the trial, his defense claimed he was psychotic, paranoid, and delusional and wanted him to be found guilty on the basis of insanity. However, the jury rejected this argument and found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and received an additional 14 years for related charges including aggravated assault, burglary, and endangerment. In the aftermath, it emerged that the university had been aware of Dervish's threats but had not adequately managed the risk. A faculty report exposed the institution's failure to implement an effective safety plan. Since Tom's tragic death, the university has taken steps to overhaul its safety protocols and improve communication, ensuring better protection for everyone on campus. The legacy of Tom Meixner remains one of profound scholarship, compassion, and an enduring impact on all who knew him. Clarissa Michelle Winchester was born in Greenville, South Carolina on July 20, 2000 to parents Michael and Melinda Winchester. By late 2021, 21-year-old Clarissa had been in a relationship with Tyler Wilkins, who you might remember from the case of Jordan Cheyenne Nabling, who disappeared on October 11, 2020. Unfortunately, Clarissa would suffer the same fate. Wilkins was known for being an oddball and a compulsive liar. On December 2, 2021, during one of their breakups, Clarissa and her father went to the home that she and Wilkins shared to retrieve her belongings. While there, he discharged a firearm in the direction of Clarissa and her father as she attempted to retrieve her stuff from inside. For that incident, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder and for pointing a firearm at them. 11 months later, while out on bail, the two rekindled their relationship, and she became pregnant with a boy that she planned to name Grayson Kane Winchester. On November 9, 2022, 6 months into the pregnancy, Clarissa strangely went missing. Her parents tried calling both Clarissa and Wilkins' cell phones all day, but neither answered. Wilkins then apparently turned his phone off because calls began going straight to voicemail. They eventually decided to go to their daughter's home, where they encountered Wilkins. He knocked on the door and Wilkins answered, but upon seeing Michael, he immediately closed the door. They then called 911 and officers were quick to respond. Officers asked if he knew where Clarissa was, but he said no. However, the location of her cell phone showed it was inside. Once officers were able to get inside, they sadly found Clarissa dead on the bedroom floor along with Grayson. It turns out that Wilkins began beating her and didn't stop until she and her baby were dead. He was then arrested and charged with murder and kidnapping since he held Clarissa in the trailer against her will. Shockingly, it was discovered that Wilkins' cousins, 43-year-old Michael and 49-year-old Melissa Burnett, were in the home at the time of the murder and did nothing as he killed her. They were both arrested as well and charged with misprision of a felony, which basically means they concealed a felony and never reported it. This is not the first death in the home. Michael Burnett's son Joshua took his own life, and it was 6 hours before the body was found, even though Michael was in the house the entire time. In the end, Wilkins pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He's still a suspect in the disappearance and presumed murder of 19-year-old Jordan Nebling. The day she went missing, she called Wilkins to pick her up when she found herself in a bind because the car she had borrowed from a friend broke down and she needed someone to pick her up. She pulled into a driveway and called the car's owner and Wilkins. The residents of the house then saw a man who looked like Wilkins pick her up around 1:30 p.m. that day. He even admitted to picking her up, driving her to his home where they argued, and says she walked away never to be seen alive again. She was reported missing a month later and remains missing today. Deborah Kemp Louse, who went by Debbie, grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. In 1975, she married her high school sweetheart, Michael Louse, who went by Mike. They would go on to have 5 children and be married for 41 years until a horrible tragedy occurred. Later on in life, Debbie began working as a music teacher in the public school system and was said to be very loved by her students. She also became the children's director at her Southern Baptist church. In the mid-'80s, they bought a house that the neighbors referred to as the Castle. One day in 1993, a stranger by the name of Curtis Head knocked on the door looking for work and offered to tend to their yard. Debbie told the man her husband could probably help him when he got home, but instead he burst inside and began punching and choking her. He tied her up and stole $50 in cash, her wedding ring, and her car keys. Thankfully, she survived the horrible ordeal, but their run-ins with criminals would not end there. Over the years, they had bikes stolen, CDs from their car, and even an entire gazebo from their yard once. She and Mike then became heavily involved in a group called Stop Turning Out Prisoners, a group that lobbied for tough-on-crime legislation. Over 2 decades later, after the first attack, Debbie would come face-to-face with evil once again. On March 23, 2017, 62-year-old Debbie was home alone when a 24-year-old man named Adam Christopher Lawson Jr. quietly broke into their home. He lived nearby and had just finished serving a 6-year sentence for burglary. Once inside, Debbie spotted him and grabbed a club to try and defend herself, but it was of no use, and he ripped the golf clubs out of her hands. He then chased her down the hall and into the kitchen, where he beat her to death with a club. Before fleeing the scene, he ransacked the house, installed 2 TVs, a laptop, a record player, some frozen food, and their Buick. When Mike came home on his lunch break, he sadly found his wife's body. All her children came into town quickly upon finding out about the murder and hatched a plan to find the killer. They visited nearby businesses, churches, and even a funeral home looking for surveillance footage and then spent hours going through it. They were able to piece enough video together to show that their parents' stolen Buick had pulled into a trailer park where Lawson lived. From there, investigators were able to track down Lawson and arrest him after finding shoes with Debbie's blood on them at his trailer. They also found a handgun inside, which he wasn't allowed to possess. In the end, Lawson took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 20 years for first-degree murder, armed burglary, auto theft, and possession of a firearm by a felon. Sadly, Mike just couldn't survive without Debbie and died on his couch in the dilapidated castle, feet from where Debbie was murdered from stress-induced cardiomyopathy, otherwise known as broken heart syndrome. Jamie Felix was born to parents Thomas and Linda Bukowski on July 14, 1978, in Bad Axe, Michigan. After high school, she earned a bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University. She was described as a very funny and witty individual who was very loyal to her friends. She also loved sports, especially the University of Michigan, and coached basketball. In 2016, she and her husband Ray Felix moved from Michigan to Port St. Lucie, Florida. She then got hired at Manatee Academy K-8, where she taught math and was named Teacher of the Year in 2023. Sadly, the very next year, a horrible tragedy occurred. Jamie and Ray had a very tumultuous relationship. He had spent years physically and emotionally abusing her. In October 2023, Jamie called the police on him after he physically assaulted her and took her phone. When officers arrived, she explained that they were at the point of filing for divorce. She also warned them that Ray could be very manipulative, was retired from law enforcement, and knows how to play cops. He was then charged with felony battery and a court date was set for April 1, 2024, 3 days before that court date. Co-workers of Jamie's received an email that Ray sent out that said that Jamie was lying about the domestic violence incident. At 6:30 p.m., they forwarded the email to the police. Earlier that day, Jamie and her 2 sons, ages 10 and 17, were leaving a business in Port St. Lucie when they were approached by a man they soon recognized as Ray, who had a gun and was dressed in disguise. He then forced the 17 and 10-year-old into his rental car and told the 17-year-old to drive and follow close behind. He then got in Jamie's SUV and instructed her to drive toward West Palm Beach. After driving for about an hour, the vehicle Jamie was driving suddenly swerved into the parking lot of a local motel in West Palm Beach. Once she was stopped, she exited the vehicle and tried to flee, but was shot and killed by Ray. The kids watched their mom fall to the ground as their dad sped off in the rental car. He drove back to the rental agency and upon arrival, remained sitting in the car. Eventually, officers called up to him and as they began to approach, he shot himself. He was rushed to the hospital and died a few hours later. As for Jamie, she was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. Jenna Nicole Burley was born to parents Ed and Jacqueline in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania on November 4, 1994. After graduating from Southern Area High School in 2013, she earned an associate's degree in liberal arts from Montgomery County Community College. She was described as a fun and unique individual who was known for helping the homeless. In 2017, 22-year-old Jenna was now a junior at Temple University, majoring in film and media studies. Unfortunately, a night out drinking would prove to be deadly. On August 31, 2017, at 1:30 a.m., surveillance footage would catch the moment that Jenna, who had been sitting alone at the bar in Pub Web after her friends left, met 29-year-old Joshua Huperterts. He began hitting on her, which she initially refused, but after drinking too much, they left, and walked nearby to his apartment where they engaged in consensual sex. Things got out of control, and at some point she refused to continue with what he wanted to do, which enraged Huberts. He then began physically assaulting her. She was hit 38 times, had a cereal bowl broken over her head, and was stabbed. She fought for her life and was even able to get the knife away from him before he strangled her to death. A biomedical graduate student who also lived in the apartment complex heard Jenna's screams and called Temple police twice. However, when they showed up, they stayed for about 5 minutes each time and left. When Huperterts' roommate Jack Miley woke up around 1 p.m. that day, he found Huperterts alone in the kitchen cleaning up blood. He also noticed that he had a deep gash on his hand and cuts on his neck. The gash was so deep that Jack recalled seeing bone. He asked him what happened, and Huperterts said he was drunk and fell into a bush. Later that afternoon, Huperterts enlisted the help of his cousin, Eric Carlson, and a Lyft driver to move the plastic storage tote with Gino's remains inside to his grandparents' house in Wayne County, Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, her father had reported her missing after being unable to get in touch with her. That's when Temple police got to work tracking down surveillance video of her final movement. And by the following day, they had identified Huperterts as the last person seen with her. However, they were unable to locate him, so they reached out to Jack, who was now in New York on a pre-planned family vacation with his sisters. Temple police called and informed him of Jenna's disappearance and said they were looking for Huperterts and asked if he would try to call him. He agreed, and when he called him, he falsely told him he was in North Carolina, but he was actually at his grandparents' house. Investigators, however, had been tracking Huperterts' phone and discovered his trip to his grandparents' home. On September 2, 2017, 2 days after Jenna's murder, Police traveled to the grandparents' home and found Jenna's remains and took Hubertus into custody. He was then charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Also, when they were searching Hubertus's home, they found a pillowcase full of marijuana and $20,000 in cash. Come to find out, Hubertus had a criminal history filled with drug and alcohol-related crimes. His ex-landlord also said that he was a very destructive and irresponsible individual. The landlord said that most times his grandmother would pay his rent and pay to have things fixed inside the apartment that Hubertus broke or messed up. In the end, Hubertus was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jenna's parents then sued PubWeb for violating the dram shop rule law after Jenna's blood alcohol content was found to be 0.283, more than 3 times the legal limit. The law holds a business selling alcohol or a person serving alcohol to someone who is visibly intoxicated liable to anyone injured by the intoxicated person. I wasn't able to find the outcome of the lawsuit, though. Thankfully, Hubertus is behind bars for good and can never hurt another innocent person again. Michelle Yvette Avila, who went by Missy, was born on February 8, 1968, in Los Angeles, California. Her parents were divorced and she lived with her mother Irene and siblings in the San Fernando Valley of LA. She was described as a social butterfly known for being pretty and stylish. In 1985, 17-year-old Missy was a student at San Fernando High School and dreamed of becoming a physical therapist, but would sadly never get the chance. Missy had been best friends with Karen Severson since they were 8. Unfortunately, after entering high school, the two had grown apart. From there, jealousy grew inside of Karen, and when it was all said and done, someone would be dead. Karen had begun spreading rumors that Missy was sleeping with different boys in the school. A group of girls even beat her up after believing the rumors. During their junior year, Missy began dating a boy named Randy, but it only lasted a month due to how much he partied. After the breakup, Randy and Karen began dating and eventually moved into an apartment together. Randy, still interested in Missy, continued to flirt with her. One time, Karen caught him pulling Missy down onto his lap. However, she had no interest in Randy and even advised Karen to break up with him. On October 1, 1985, Missy told her mother she was going out with one of her school friends, Laura and Dole. Dole picked Missy up at her home and the two left. For hours later, Laura called Missy's mother and asked to speak with Missy. This caught her mom off guard, who responded that she thought Missy was with her. Laura responded that she had dropped her off with 3 boys, driving a blue Camaro, and went down the street to get gas. Once she returned, Missy and the 3 boys were gone. 3 days later, Missy's body was found by hikers lying face down in a stream at Big Tahana Canyon in Angeles National Forest. She had been savagely beaten to death. Her hair had been hacked off. Her face was battered and her hoop earrings were ripped out. The case would remain unsolved for 3 years until a girl named Eva Chirumbula came and reported seeing Missy being led into the woods on the day she disappeared by 2 girls. She was asked who the girls were and investigators were shocked at her response. She said it was Karen Severson and Laura Dole. She said that on the day Missy disappeared, she had taken a 45-minute drive into the mountains, and that's where she saw the 3 girls enter the woods. She stopped and watched, and sometime later only Severson and Doyle came out. Severson and Doyle were then arrested and charged with first-degree murder. It was determined that they lured Missy to the creek in the woods so they could yell at her about her alleged promiscuity. Both the girls accused her of having sex with their boyfriends and told her she had messed up too many relationships. They then beat and drowned her to death and placed a 4-foot, 100-pound log on her body. Before being caught, Severson had spent the last 3 years helping Missy's family look for the killer. They had no idea the person was right under their noses the entire time. Dole, on the other hand, sent Missy's mother a sympathy card with $20 in it after the murder. In March of 1990, Karen Severson and Laura Dole were convicted of second-degree murder and both were sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. During a 2002 parole hearing, Dole admitted to coaxing Missy into the water and killing her. She also accused Severson of being the ringleader, though Severson would only later admit to planning to torment her. Severson was released from prison on December 9, 2011, after serving 21 and a half years, and Dole was released at the age of 45 after serving 22 years. After Severson got out of prison, she began promoting a memoir about the crime and her prison experience and made a deal to produce a film. Missy's family sued her in 2015, seeking to take the profits from the sales. Because of this, the state of California passed Missy's law, requiring entities helping publish works made by criminals to contact the victims' families about the said works. Severson claims the murder was not premeditated and that Missy didn't deserve to die. Yeah. No shit. Brenda Page was born in Ipswich, England, and studied zoology at University College London. She then earned her PhD in genetics from the University of Glasgow. That's where she met Christopher Merlin Harnett Harrison, and on May 6, 1972, they married. The following year, Brenda was appointed principal of the newly formed genetics department at the University of Aberdeen Medical School, while Christopher stayed in Edinburgh to finish up school. Once he was done and moved to Aberdeen, they bought a house together at 12 Mile End Place. Unfortunately, the marriage was very rocky, with Brenda saying that Christopher could be very unpredictable at times. Sometimes he was extremely nice, while other times he was very nasty and made Brenda feel like she was walking on eggshells. He even assaulted her on more than one occasion, forcing her to be hospitalized. In 1975, Christopher made her move out, and in 1976, she purchased her own flat at 13 Allen Street. After 5 years of marriage, they divorced in 1977. However, Christopher wasn't exactly done and in the end, would be dead. After the divorce, Brenda had Christopher banned from the university campus. Unfortunately, the flat she purchased was a bit too much for her income, so she began looking at other ways to make money and stumbled upon an ad from Capital Escorts. The job was to escort rich businessmen from the oil industry to dinner and drinks and provide good conversation, something that Brenda loved. She also didn't keep the escort side job a secret and told her friend, sister, and mother about it. However, Christopher also found out and called her a whore and allegedly began stalking her. Unfortunately, in 1978, her new life would end just as quickly as it began when a horrible tragedy occurred. On July 13th, 32-year-old Brenda arrived home from the university, got ready, and headed out for the night. She enjoyed dinner and drinks at the Treetops Hotels in Aberdeen with two businessmen before driving herself home around 2:30 a.m. The following day, she failed to show up for work, which concerned her coworkers, who knew that she rarely missed a day. One of her coworkers tried calling her, but there was no answer. So he contacted her elderly neighbor Elizabeth Gordon and asked her to go over and check on Brenda. That's when she was found in her nightgown, beaten to death. Investigators determined that her killer had entered the apartment through a window and waited for her to return home. A massive search got underway, looking for the murder weapon and possibly even the killer's blood-stained clothes, even asking the public to check their trash cans. Unfortunately, nothing was found. Christopher was arrested and brought in for questioning, but there was no evidence at the time to link him to the murder, and the case would ultimately go unsolved for the next 40 years. After the murder, he left town and moved to the Netherlands. In 2020, 78-year-old Christopher was finally arrested for the murder of Brenda after his biological DNA was found on her bedding, despite him telling police they never had sex in her flat. They also had tiny flakes of paint that were discovered on the window and matched flakes found inside his car. During the trial, it was discovered that Brenda told her friend that when they were still living together, she was afraid he would kill her. She even fled the home one night and sought refuge at a police station. In the end, in March of 2023, 82-year-old Christopher was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. This means he will most likely die behind bars and will never be able to hurt anyone ever again. Michael Moan, who went by Eli, was born on February 16, 1997, to parents Charles Moan and Kim Thomas Jackson. In 2014, 17-year-old Eli was a senior at Mayfield High School in Mayfield, Kentucky, and was also the school's mascot. He was said to have a bubbly personality who loved people and they loved him back. Unfortunately, his mother, Kim, had been dating a career criminal named Terry Lee Froman for the last 4 years, and the relationship had begun to sour. Then on August 20th, 2014, she broke things off and asked him to move out. Apparently, he did nothing to help them out, forcing her to pay the rent and all of the bills. Instead of staying there that night, she and Eli chose to sleep over at her father's home. The following morning on August 21st, Kim went to work at the nursing home Mills Health and Rehab Center. After arriving, Froman shockingly showed up and entered Kim's office. This seriously concerned her coworker, who knew they had a very tumultuous relationship and had just broken up the night before. In order to get him out of her office, Kim's supervisor knocked on the door and told her she was needed in a meeting. Froman then left, but not before saying, and I quote, "Kim has made me lose everything. Now I will make her lose everything, no matter the cost." A little over a week later, on Labor Day weekend, Froman finally moved out. However, he wasn't quite done with her and began texting her neighbor Kurt Stafford, wanting to know if any men had shown up at the house. The first time Kurt said no, but the second time he asked, Kurt responded that he didn't want to get involved. A week later, on Friday, September 12, 2014, just before 5 a.m., Kurt suddenly woke up to the sound of gunshots. Around 6 a.m., he stepped outside but didn't notice anything. About an hour later, 911 received a call from a gas station employee in Paducah reporting that a woman had been abducted. Police checked the surveillance footage and saw a naked Kim attempt to flee his 2004 white GMC Yukon before Froman grabbed her by the hair, forced her back inside, and then drove off. He then showed up at his mother's home covered in blood. She tried to find out what was going on, but he wouldn't tell her, so she called 911. He then called a friend of his by the name of David Clark and admitted that he had just murdered Eli and had fled a couple of hours away from Mayfield. However, he wouldn't tell David his exact location. David, in a desperate attempt to find Kim, called Froman's daughter Alexis. She contacted her father crying and asked him to let Kim go, but he refused. David then called the Paducah police and they had him come up there and make several recorded phone calls to Froman. During those calls, he once again confessed to killing Eli after he tried to stop him from kidnapping Kim. He also said on the calls that he was going to kill her as well. Sadly, they were unsuccessful in getting him to release her, and when he called them back, he said, and I quote, "She's dead, I shot myself." Ohio State Highway Patrol finally caught up with him right as he was firing his weapon, and a tactical team was subsequently deployed and able to apprehend him. After Froman was taken into custody, they found that he had shot himself in the upper chest and Kim had been shot a total of 4 times. They also discovered that she had been beaten up pretty badly before being shot to death. Meanwhile, 3 of Kim's co-workers showed up at her house after police contacted her work and sadly found Eli dead in the front yard. Froman survived his self-inflicted gunshot, and on June 13, 2017, he was convicted of aggravated murder and kidnapping and sentenced to death. Kimberly Jo Medlin was born in Ann Arbor on December 1, 1970, and went by Kim. In early 1997, 26-year-old Kim was living in Monroe, North Carolina with her husband Bridger, and worked as a waitress at a strip club in Charlotte. She loved her job and the money was very good. There was always a lot of unwanted attention, but she knew how to handle herself. When she would get off work in the early morning hours, she would always call her husband and tell him she was leaving. However, one of those drives home would sadly prove to be deadly. Earlier that month, as she was driving home, an angry driver got behind her and began honking their horn and following her extremely close. Out of fear, she decided to make a detour to the police station and reported the incident to several of the officers on duty. Unfortunately, this would be the biggest mistake of her life. 2 weeks later, on March 29, 1997, she left the club and would never arrive home. Around 4 a.m., her red Jeep was found on the side of the road, still running with the lights on, and the window rolled down. Her purse and cash from the night were on the seat, but she, along with her driver's license, were nowhere to be found. The following day, Kim's body was found about 1.5 miles from where her Jeep was located. She was found underneath some debris in a field at the end of a deserted cul-de-sac. She had sadly been strangled to death. Robbery was quickly ruled out because none of her money was taken, and she was still wearing her wedding ring and other jewelry. An autopsy revealed that not only had she been strangled, but she had also been severely beaten. They also found signs that her hands were bound with something, but removed before her killer left the scene. However, there were no signs of sexual assault. Investigators then began retracing her steps and discovered that she left the club around 2 a.m. and called her husband 15 minutes later. After speaking with Bridger, he fell asleep while waiting for her to arrive home. At 4:20, Bridger was called and notified that Kim's Jeep was found abandoned and she was nowhere to be found. He then told something interesting to investigators. He said that Kim would have never pulled over for anyone except for a police officer. This led them to believe that maybe she was pulled over by someone impersonating a police officer, which would explain her missing license and window being rolled down. Investigators were at a loss until a witness came forward and told some shocking information. He said that he had actually been driving behind Kim on the night of the murder and that he witnessed a Monroe police officer pull her over. This also coincided with the shoe print that was found on her sweatshirt, which matched a Thurgood brand uniform-style shoe that officers with the police department typically wore. Based on the shoe sizes, they were able to identify 3 officers, but 2 of them were ruled out because they were on duty and in constant contact with headquarters on the night of the murder. That only left one person, 23-year-old Joshua Griffin. Griffin had only been on the force for about a year when Kim was murdered. Investigators searched his cruiser and found it to be unusually clean. His police chief even said he was known for keeping a very messy car. They then obtained a search warrant for his home, hoping to find his shoes, but he conveniently said he threw them out because they were damaged. His cell phone records were then checked and actually put him near the crime scene on the night of the murder. He had even called for a tow truck at 2 a.m. and when asked about that, he said that he left work at 10 p.m. and drove to a restaurant parking lot. He said he was looking at his logbook when a man approached him. The man asked him to call a tow truck because his car broke down. This would have been about 30 to 45 minutes before Kim drove by. It was finally discovered that Josh had taken notice of Kim when she reported the road rage incident 2 weeks earlier and made a comment to another officer that she was a babe. It was also learned that he had mentioned to other officers about getting the license plate numbers of other attractive women he saw. After being arrested, other women came forward and reported also being harassed by him. However, he wouldn't confess to the murder until 4 years later in 2001. Based on his confession and the prosecutor's theory, this is what they believe happened on the night of the murder. Griffin was off duty but was still wearing his uniform and driving his cruiser. While sitting in the restaurant parking lot, he saw her drive by and decided to pull her over. He then made her get into the passenger seat of his cruiser while he ran her license. They believe at some point he made a sexual advance, but she rejected him and it either pissed him off or he panicked. He then put handcuffs on her and drove her to the deserted industrial road where she was ultimately found. Once there, she tried to flee, but he hit her, stomped her body and strangled her to death. After she was dead, he threw his boots into a retail store's dumpster and cut up her license and flushed it down a toilet. When he confessed, he lied to make himself appear to also be a victim in the case. He claimed he owed drug dealers money for steroids and they said he could pay the debt by kidnapping Kim and turning her over to them. He said he murdered her while the drug dealers were holding him at gunpoint. Clearly, this part of the story is not true. Regardless, he was already serving life in prison after being found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping in 1998. Latrice Renee Mays was born on November 20, 1986. In 2013, 26-year-old Latrice was a mother of 5, living in an apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan with her boyfriend Jaleel Hoskins, who was the father of 2 of her children. Unfortunately, their relationship was very tumultuous, and she had plans to move out, but would never get the chance after she strangely went missing. Before her disappearance, police received a call about a domestic assault at their apartment. However, when they arrived, they said they couldn't find any evidence to support the claims that a physical altercation had occurred and Hoskins was never arrested. Then on March 19, 2013, the day Latrice went missing, she was seen near her apartment on the corner of Division and Burton Streets. The following day, she failed to pick up her daughter from school at 3:30 p.m. I'm guessing someone else took her to school that morning. When the school called her family to let them know that Latrice never showed up, they knew immediately something was wrong and reported her missing. Investigators quickly honed in on Hoskins as their main person of interest. However, when they went to question him on March 21, 2013, he claimed he didn't know where she was. Investigators had a forensics team go through their apartment looking for evidence of foul play, but nothing was found. A month would go by with no leads until Hoskins' cousin, Gregory Shanklin, was arrested and charged with perjury. Hoskins was also arrested on a parole violation. While being questioned by investigators, Gregory shocked them when he began telling them information about Latrice's disappearance. He said that Hoskins and Latrice had been fighting on the day she disappeared because of an incident that occurred a month prior. Allegedly, Hoskins had gotten into an argument with the father of two of her children, Kenneth Harris, at a local bar. The argument ended with Hoskins stabbing Kenneth, and Latrice was the only one who witnessed the ordeal. Thankfully, the stabbing was not fatal. However, since Hoskins was out on parole, he was worried he would be sent right back to jail. So he decided to get rid of the only witness. He told Gregory that he choked her to death, wrapped her up in a sheet, and disposed of her in a dumpster at the Peppercorn Apartments in Wyoming, Michigan, a little over 2 miles away. Unfortunately, when investigators tracked down the dumpster, it had already been emptied and the contents incinerated. Equipped with this new information, Hoskins was charged with Latrice's murder. His trial began on December 10, 2013, but the following day, the trial ended when he decided to plead guilty to second-degree murder. He even apologized to her family. However, his demeanor quickly changed when the judge handed down a sentence of 50 to 100 years in prison. I guess he thought pleading guilty would get him a lesser sentence. If things weren't already bad enough, Hoskins decided to stoop even lower by writing a letter to Latrice's family where he blamed her for her own demise. If Latrice's remains were really put in the dumpster, they are sadly gone forever. Robert Mack Kennedy III was born on July 7, 2001, and went by the nickname Little Man. In 2017, 16-year-old Robert was living in Williamsburg, Kentucky, and was described as an intelligent individual who was very much against drugs. Unfortunately, his family didn't quite feel the same way, and it would ultimately lead to a horrible murder. At the time, Robert was living on Deep Branch Road with his mother, 36-year-old Imogene Orme Gardner-Bittner, and his stepfather of about 2 years, 24-year-old Christopher Michael Bittner. The home was owned by his maternal grandmother, Kathy Faulkner, who was allowing them to live there while she was out of town. On September 13, 2017, Kathy arrived at the home to find a horrifying scene. Inside, she found her daughter, Imogene, dead with a bag over her head. In a panic, she called her sister, who lived just down the road, and then quickly called 911. While on the call with the dispatcher, she said, and I quote, "It looks like they put a bag over her head, oh my God," and then clarified a bit and said, "I have been having some problems out of some guys in Indiana, but I think that they put them in jail or something, I don't know." Then Robert and his stepfather Christopher were also found dead on the property. All 3 individuals had sadly been strangled to death with zip ties, and they had been dead for around 2 days. As investigators began looking into the case, they discovered that Kathy had met a man in 2012 or 2013 by the name of Darnell Chivers. At the time, he was in prison in Indiana, but he moved in with her after being paroled in 2016. At some point, Chivers stole Kathy's truck and heroin. She called and asked him to return it, and he arrived back at her house with it on August 17, 2017. However, he was in his Cadillac Escalade, along with Jeremy Hatfield and Anthony Hester, also known as Tony G. Then all 4 of them left, including Kathy, and drove to a nearby Walmart. When the men were inside, Kathy stole the vehicle and returned home. She and some of her friends then armed themselves, and the three men found a ride back to the house, and a nasty altercation occurred. In order to get back at Kathy, Chivers poured about 3 ounces of her heroin on the floor. The police were then called, and Hatfield and Hester ran into the woods and hid out because they were on probation in Indiana. When police arrived, Kathy said she wanted Chivers away from her home, so they drove him into town and let him go. Meanwhile, 2 of Kathy's friends, one being a juvenile, looked in the Escalade and found a backpack that contained 2 handguns, zip ties, gloves, and other items. The 2 friends took the 2 guns and left the rest of the items. When Kathy realized the guns were gone, Christopher went and asked for them back, but they only gave him one of the weapons. In January 2018, Chivers was questioned by police after being arrested in Ohio on unrelated charges. He admitted to being at Kathy's home in August of 2017, but denied going back and murdering her family a month later. In December of 2018, Chivers, Hatfield, and Hester were arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder, burglary, and tampering with physical evidence. They were arrested after Hatfield decided to cooperate with investigators. On the day of the murders, all 3 men arrived at Kathy's home but noticed her vehicle was gone. Thinking no one was home, they decided to steal her safe, which they thought contained drugs and cash. The 3 men forced their way inside the house through the back door, but were shocked to find Robert, Imogene, and Christopher inside. Chivers was armed with an AR-15, and Hester had a handgun. They then strangled all 3 and poured bleach over everything in an attempt to get rid of DNA evidence. At the time of their arrest, Hatfield had a weapons charge against him and was extradited back to Kentucky a month prior. As for Chivers, he was already in jail in Ohio for unrelated charges. Chivers' trial has since been delayed because he needed a mental health evaluation before the judge would allow him to stand trial. He also refused an attorney because he wanted to represent himself, but they appointed him a defense anyway, and he entered a not guilty plea on Chivers' behalf. As of August 2024, all 3 men are still awaiting the outcome of the case. Jessica Brittany Miller was born on September 11, 1984 in Atlanta, Georgia to parents Billy and Donna. In 2003, 19-year-old Jessica was the mother of a toddler named Maddie. That same year, she married 41-year-old Adolph Neal, who went by Sonny, and he soon adopted Maddie. They then spent the next 8 years investing in real estate, and in 2012 they opened a tanning salon and boutique called Dazzle. Jessica was happy but continued school because she really wanted to be a dental hygienist. Unfortunately, their marriage was on the rocks and they had begun seeing other people. However, they kept their troubles secret and still portrayed the perfect marriage and perfect home. Unfortunately, at their home in Dalton, Georgia, where all 3 lived, including her grandfather, 69-year-old Donald Shedd, a horrible tragedy would occur. Jessica's father, Billy, and her stepmother had left Savannah and moved in with them while they were working on opening a new bar. However, their stay was short after Sonny kicked them out. That's when they realized not everything was as it seemed and knew now that their daughter's marriage was quickly coming to an end. They began trying to help her, but she refused to let them. On May 23, 2012, while at lunch with her stepmother, she told her she was finally done with Sonny and going to get a divorce. She also said Sonny had begged her for another chance, which she rejected. That night, she sent her father, Billy, a text that read, "All hell is breaking loose." After she and Sonny got into a nasty argument, Billy offered to come over, but she unfortunately said no. That was sadly the last time they ever heard from her. The following morning around 7 o'clock, a neighbor opened their door to find Maddie crying and saying that her great-grandfather was dead and she couldn't find her parents. 911 was quickly called, and when police arrived, they found Jessica dead in the pool house. She had tragically been beaten and stabbed to death. Her grandfather, Don, was found dead in the kitchen. He had also been beaten to death in what investigators described as an extreme overkill. However, Sonny was strangely nowhere to be found and all the vehicles were still at the home. A manhunt ensued for a week before police received a tip that Sonny was spotted walking down Highway 201 and headed toward Varnell. This area is about 14 miles from their house, and police were quickly able to capture him. When he was brought in for his interview, he admitted to the murders and said he was mixing Xanax and alcohol that night. This allegedly caused him to go into an explosive emotional rage, but Jessica's family doesn't believe it. They instead think he's a narcissistic sociopath who cheated and abused Jessica before finally murdering her. In order to avoid a trial and have Maddie having to testify, they agreed to Sonny being offered a plea deal that would allow him to plead guilty and be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the end, he accepted the deal in order to avoid the death penalty. Veronica Claire Butler was born on February 28, 1997 to parents Clinton and Amanda. After high school, she became a certified nursing assistant and began working at various nursing homes. She was said to enjoy cooking, gardening, and dancing, and was described as a warm and generous individual. In 2019, she met and fell in love with Tracy Lee Pites, and for the next 5 years, they shared every bit of their lives together until a horrible tragedy took her away from him. Unfortunately, before meeting Tracy, she was involved with a man named Wrangler Rickman, who she had 2 children with. By 2024, the two were going through a bitter custody battle, and her friend, 39-year-old Jillian Kelly, was her court-appointed supervisor for her Saturday visitation rights with the kids. Everything had been going Veronica's way, and the court was about to issue her unsupervised visitation rights. Unfortunately, that upcoming decision is what fueled a group of crazy individuals to murder her. On Saturday, March 30th, 2024, Veronica made plans to meet Wrangler's mother, Tiffany Adams, at Four Corners in Texas County, Oklahoma, to pick up her children ages 6 and 8 to take them to a birthday party. However, after Veronica and Jillian left to go pick them up, they were never seen alive again. When they failed to show up at the birthday party, Veronica's family went to the location where they were supposed to pick up the children. Upon arriving, they found the car they were in, but no signs of either woman. However, they did notice blood on the ground around the car and on the road and realized something terrible had happened. Also at the scene were Veronica's glasses, a broken hammer, and Jillian's purse. Inside her purse was a pistol magazine, but the gun was missing. Investigators checked their phone records and found that they were either turned off or destroyed at about 9:42 that morning. The last place they pinged was at the home of Cole and Cora Twombly, on property owned by James Beasley, who went by Jamie, about 8.5 miles from where the car was found. 2 days after their disappearance on April 1st, investigators got a search warrant to search Tiffany's phone. That's when they discovered Google searches for taser pain levels, gun shops, prepaid cell phones, and how to get someone out of their house. They also learned that a month earlier, on February 13th, 2024, Tiffany had purchased 3 prepaid cell phones that all pinged in the area where Veronica's car was found. Investigators then started looking into Tiffany's boyfriend, Tad Burke-Collum, and learned that he rented a pasture for cattle grazing from Jamie in the same location where the women's cell phones last pinged. Jamie said that Tad asked him on March 28th he would cut down a tree, remove the stump, bury some concrete, and do some dirt work below the dam. On the night of March 29th, Jamie saw Tad's skid steer parked on the property, but by the following morning, it was gone. On Sunday, March 31st, Tad admitted to Jamie that people were looking at him for the disappearances of Veronica and Kelly, and also expressed worry about the suspicious skid steer tracks on the property. Jamie allegedly told him that he would be honest if investigators asked him. Meanwhile, investigators had learned that Tiffany bought 5 stone guns at a store in Guyman, Oklahoma on March 23rd. 13 days later, on April 13th, law enforcement agents executed a search warrant on the property, especially the area where Tad had done work. That's when they discovered Veronica and Jillian's bodies in a freezer buried in the ground, along with one of the stun guns Tiffany bought. Also buried were several articles of clothing with bloodstains, including 2 sweatshirts, t-shirts, cloth gloves, a black K-bar knife in sheath, and duct tape. Tad, Cora, and Cole were then all arrested and charged with the murders. When Tad was arrested, he had a rifle, ammunition, body armor, and a go bag prepared at his home. Also, there was 31-year-old Paul Grice, and police noticed he had a bandage on his right pinky. When asked what happened, he claimed he had hurt himself working on a truck. However, a witness came forward on April 18th and told investigators that Paul admitted his DNA would be found with the bodies. He also asked them 3 questions. How long it would take to process DNA evidence? How long would DNA last in dirt if it was being churned? And do you know how to get a guy and his family into Mexico? After learning that, he was also arrested. When Tiffany was brought into the police station for further questioning, she openly admitted to being involved. Cora and Cole's 16-year-old daughter also told investigators that her mother admitted that she and the other suspects had murdered Veronica and Jillian and had told her on March 29th that they were going on a mission. When they returned home the following day, they instructed her to clean up their truck and told her they never had to worry about Veronica again. She then asked them why Jillian had to die, to which they responded because she supported Veronica. In a shocking twist, this was not the group's first attempt at murdering Veronica. In February 2024, they came up with a plan to drive in front of her and throw an anvil through her windshield. But Veronica never left her house and the plan was called off. Come to find out, all 5 individuals were part of an anti-government group with religious affiliation called God's Misfits. Cora even regularly hosted meetings for the group at their home. However, the group has since condemned the actions of the 5 individuals and said that is not what the group is about. All 5 individuals were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping and conspiracy. Many of the items found are being tested for DNA and prosecutors are hoping the results will seal the suspect's fate. However, as of August 2024, they are all currently in jail without bonds awaiting the outcome of the case. Channing Elizabeth Freelove was born on November 12, 1974 in Fort Worth, Texas to parents John and Jana. Channing was a very smart student, graduating summa cum laude from R.L. Pascal High School, where she also excelled at soccer. Unfortunately, she also got herself involved in drugs. After high school, she received a $1,000 scholarship to attend Texas Christian University, also known as TCU, and moved into an apartment with 18-year-old Melanie Louisa Goldshirt. Channing was a pre-med student taking advanced placement courses, while Melanie, who was born in Perth, Western Australia on June 8, 1975, attended Torrent County Junior College. Their freshman year was off to a great start until a horrible tragedy occurred. Leading up to the tragedy, Channing had begun dealing drugs in order to make some extra money, and that's how she met Brandy Sorelli and Sherry Sykes. She supplied them with drugs and had been engaged in a relationship with each woman. However, the relationship with Sykes was short-lived after Channing and Sorelli slept together. Sykes then moved Sorelli in with her, which upset Channing, who showed up at their apartment in a jealous rage, brandishing a pistol and threatening to take her own life. She even tried to jump off their balcony and had to be restrained. Also at the apartment were 19-year-old Melvin James White II, a.k.a. Boot, and 22-year-old Darren Deshaun Curl, a.k.a. Taz, who were members of the gang Crips and had bought weed from Channing in the past. Once Channing calmed down and left, Sykes said, and I quote, "I'm so angry with her I could kill her." Brandy was also overheard saying, and I quote, "I'm sick of Channing's high school crap. If she ever comes around here again, I'll get rid of her my way." Not long after, on November 11, 1993, Sykes called Channing and asked her to go to dinner so they could work out their differences. Melanie wasn't involved in the drug side of Channing's life, but usually tagged along to make sure she stayed safe. When she and Channing met Sykes at dinner, they had no idea that she was having someone break into their apartment and steal several pounds of marijuana that Channing had recently received from her supplier. This allegedly happened twice and put Channing in a horrible bind because now she only had 1 pound left and owed her supplier $6,000. At dinner that night, Sykes told them that she and Sorelli were heading to Arkansas the next day to visit relatives. The following day, on her 19th birthday, Channing finally confessed to her parents about what she had been doing in a desperate attempt to get the $6,000, telling them she had to pay or her supplier would kill her. A friend of hers even heard her on the phone with the supplier pleading for her life. Unfortunately, they either didn't have the money or refused to give it to her, and she left with nothing but her mother's car. That night, she, Melanie, and another female student named Mary Tuttle went out to celebrate. After returning home, Channing's beeper went off around 10:30 p.m., and she called the number back. It was the leader of the Project What's Crips, Boot White, and he wanted to buy all the weed she had left. She found this strange because he had never bought that much before, so she made sure to bring her pistol with her. Melanie was also worried and decided to tag along. Channing tucked her pistol in her waistband and they left the apartment together, never to be seen alive again. Shortly before 4 a.m., a man riding his bicycle passed a 1984 Oldsmobile parked in the driveway of a home that was typically vacant. On each side of the car, illuminated only by the street lamp, he saw two bodies lying face down. The police were called, and when investigators arrived, they identified the bodies as belonging to Channing and Melanie. Both had been shot to death, and Channing's pistol was still in her waistband, which means she likely was caught off guard. The murder weapon was determined to be a .380 caliber handgun. The case wouldn't take long to solve after two informants came forward and told police that Sykes and Sorelli had approached them about killing Channing. 2 days after the murders, the women were arrested and charged with solicitation of capital murder. They were also found with 4 pounds of the missing weed. However, investigators didn't believe they pulled the trigger and were looking for White and Curl, whom they believed had actually carried out the horrible deed. On November 18th, 6 days after the murders, police received a 911 call from a grocery store reporting that 2 men were harassing the store clerks. When they arrived, they discovered the men were White and Curl, who already had warrants out for their arrest. They were arrested at the scene and charged with capital murder. 6 days later, it was determined that Sykes and Sorelli never hired them to carry out the murders, and they did it themselves because they wanted to steal the weed that Channing had. Come to find out, Curl had talked on numerous occasions about killing Channing and robbing her. Once it was determined that Sykes and Sorelli really had nothing to do with the murders, the charges were dismissed in January 1994. In the end, Sykes and Sorelli pleaded guilty to drug charges and were both sentenced to 10 years probation. Most believe the women got off easy, especially considering they stole Channing's weed and didn't care that her supplier might kill her because of it. Curl was offered a plea deal but refused and took his case to trial. His defense argued that Curl only murdered the women because White would kill him if he didn't. However, a fellow gang member by the name of Daryl Ellis would testify that on the morning of the murders, he showed up at Curl's apartment and found him wiping blood off his .380 caliber handgun. Curl then drove Ellis by the crime scene while police were there examining it. He then bragged about killing Channing and seeing the horrified look on Melanie's face after she realized she was next. The 2 men then drove to some railroad tracks and hid the gun under some brush. Wyatt and Curl were also suspects in the murder of Robert Crenshaw, who worked as a cook at a restaurant. Curl was also linked to 2 drive-by shootings and a jailhouse assault on a deaf-mute prisoner. In the end, he was found guilty of capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 5 weeks later, White pleaded guilty and was also sentenced to life in prison. Sadly, it turns out that her supplier had actually believed her when she told him she had been robbed and was willing to work with her on it. If it weren't for Curl and White, both women would likely still be alive. Noah Kenneth Bush was born on January 22, 2016 to Demetrius and Antonio. In 2024, 8-year-old Noah was living in Jessup, Georgia with his mother and her boyfriend, Stephen Fuller. Noah was in the 2nd grade at James E. Bacon and was described as a very lively and loving child who showed a lot of ambition. He loved playing sports and video games and dreamed of one day playing in the NBA. Unfortunately, he would never get the chance. On May 15, 2024, at about 9 p.m., Noah left his home on foot with 2 boys he knew, ages 10 and 11, never to be seen alive again. When he hadn't returned by 9 to 10 p.m., his family reported him missing, and a search quickly ensued. That night at 12:30 a.m., a pair of children's shoes were found near a borrow pit, and Noah's family confirmed they were his. Divers entered the water around 3:04 a.m., but after an hour of not finding anything, they decided it would be better to drain the water out. However, the pump broke, and at 8 a.m., the divers got back in the water, and within 15 minutes, they sadly found Noah's body. At first, authorities didn't suspect foul play, since the autopsy determined he had no injuries and died from drowning. Regardless, his family was adamant that he was afraid of the water and would have never been near the borrow pit at the construction site. The community also believed there was more to the story. A few weeks later, investigators discovered some new information that shocked everyone when the 10 and 11-year-old that Noah was seen with were arrested. The boys had let it slip that one of them had pushed Noah into the deep portion of the borrow pit that they were wading in after getting into an argument. One of the boys' mothers, Natalie Hardison, was also arrested and charged with probation violation and making false statements. As for the 11-year-old, he's been charged with involuntary manslaughter, and the 10-year-old has been charged with concealing the death of another. As of August 2024, all three are in custody, awaiting the outcome of the case. Susan Heather Stubbs was born on August 11, 1974 in Russellville, Arkansas to parents Cherry and Shirley, and went by her middle name. In 2016, 41-year-old Heather was living in Conway, Arkansas, and was the mother of three. Unfortunately, she was dating Scotty Ray Gardner, a dangerous career criminal who was paroled on December 4, 2014 after serving 23 years in a state prison for attempted murder. He was charged with that after shooting his 6-month pregnant wife 7 times. Before that, he served 3 years in prison starting in 1986. Not so surprisingly, the relationship quickly turned tumultuous and Heather obtained an order of protection against him. However, she later requested it to be dropped. On March 6, 2016, Heather and Gardner returned to their motel room at the Days Inn in Conway, Arkansas, after attending church when they got into a nasty argument. At some point, Heather pushed him and he retaliated by throwing her on the bed and choking her. He then found a cord in the room and strangled her to death. After she was dead, Gardner stole her $240 and 2 cell phones. He then told the motel clerk that he would be back later to pay the bill, but when he didn't return later that day, she decided to check the room. That's when she found Heather's body. After fleeing the scene, he sold Heather's phone for $150 and sold an iPad and watch in the parking lot of a casino in Oklahoma. However, he wasn't alone and had 2 other men with him. After leaving the casino the following morning, all 3 returned to Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is where police were able to track him down. Once he was in custody, he was taken back to Conway and brought in for questioning and actually confessed to the murder. He had also told his ex-wife, Jewel Magenty, before the murder that he was going to kill Heather. He then confessed to Jewel after the murder and said she got what she deserved. In the end, Gardner was found guilty of capital murder after jurors deliberated for only 12 minutes. He was then sentenced to death. Jennifer Farber Dulos was born into a very wealthy family in New York City on September 27, 1968. Her father, Hilliard Farber, ran the Chase Manhattan Bank's bond trading desk before starting his own brokerage firm called Hilliard Farber and Company. She was also a niece by marriage to the fashion designer Liz Claiborne. After high school, she earned a degree from Brown University and then a master's degree in writing from the New York University Tisch School of the Arts. While at Brown, she met Fotis Dulos, who was born in Turkey and grew up in Athens, Greece. He came to the United States in 1986 and graduated from Brown in 1989. At the time, Fotis was married, but it only lasted 4 years. After the divorce, he and Jennifer married and moved to Farmington, Connecticut. They eventually had 5 children, including 2 sets of twins. However, by 2012, the marriage was in trouble and 5 years later, in 2017, 48-year-old Jennifer filed for divorce after learning that Fotis was having an affair with his colleague, Michelle Triconis, who was from Venezuela. While Michelle was born in Memphis, Tennessee, her parents were from Venezuela and they returned when she was 6 years old. After high school, she studied psychopedagogy and then specialized in offering equine-assisted therapies for children living with disabilities. She then moved to Argentina and remained there for around 10 years. While there, She gave birth to her daughter and eventually hosted a show on ESPN. Then, in 2012, she moved to Miami, Florida to be closer to family. Unfortunately, she got sucked in by Fotis' narcissistic ways. As for Jennifer and Fotis, they began a nasty divorce and custody battle, and Jennifer wrote in the filing that she was sure the divorce would infuriate Fotis, and he would retaliate by trying to harm her in some way. After Jennifer and the kids moved to New Canaan, Connecticut, Fotis moved Michelle and her daughter into the home. After the move, Jennifer continued to earn a living writing for Patch.com. That same year, it was discovered that Fotis was in financial trouble. He had also bought a weapon and allegedly threatened to kidnap his children if Jennifer didn't agree to his terms in the divorce settlement. In 2017, Jennifer requested an emergency custody order, and by March, she was awarded sole physical custody after the judge learned Fotis had violated several court orders. He was given supervised visitation and his phone calls with the children were monitored. Before she was awarded custody, her father died, which led to her mother, Gloria, suing Fotis for the $1.7 million that he owed them. It appeared that everything was crashing down around Fotis and would eventually boil over to the point of no return. On May 24, 2019, Jennifer dropped the kids off at school and returned home. She was captured on a neighbor's security camera arriving back home at 8:05 a.m. After that, she was never seen alive again. After missing 2 appointments that day and being unable to find her, her 2 friends reported her missing. Everyone close to her knew that Fotis had threatened her life, which raised their concerns even further. When police arrived at her home, they found her Range Rover in the garage, which she typically used, but her other vehicle was missing. Inside the house, they found blood spatter on the floor, door, and on a wall in the garage, as well as on the outside of her SUV. There was also blood found in the kitchen, and DNA tests revealed that most of it belonged to Jennifer, but some of it also belonged to Fotis. They checked her home security footage and saw her Chevrolet Suburban leaving the home at around 10:25 that morning. They were able to determine that Fotis was the one driving. At 7:30 p.m. that evening, cameras caught Fotis and Michelle dumping garbage bags in multiple trash cans an hour away in Hartford. When investigators located the bags and looked inside, they found various pieces of clothing and cleaning items that were covered in Jennifer's blood. They then found the Suburban on the side of the road near Waveney Park, a little over 3 miles from her home. However, there was still no sign of Jennifer. Investigators knew Fotis was involved because they caught him on a neighbor's security camera riding toward Jennifer's house on a bicycle. They theorized that he entered the home and waited in the garage for her to return. After killing her, he loaded her remains in the Suburban and fled the scene. 8 days after her disappearance, on June 1st, Fotis and Michelle were arrested at a hotel in Avon, Connecticut, and charged with tampering with evidence and hindering prosecution. In September 2019, they were arrested again for tampering with evidence. And by October, Michelle and her 10-year-old daughter had moved out of Fotis' home in Farmington. Finally, in January of 2020, Fotis was arrested and charged with kidnapping and capital murder. Michelle was also arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Fotis' friend and former attorney Kent Douglas Mooney was arrested as well that day and also charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Mooney's wife accused him of sexual assault and the two separated. She then went to the police and said she feared Fotis and Mooney were planning to kill her. After Jennifer disappeared, a shallow grave was discovered at a secluded property that Mooney owned. When authorities searched the grave in August of 2019, they found 2 bags of lime and a blue tarp, but no remains were found. Even though Fotis' bond was set at $6 million, he was still able to post bail. Then, on January 28th, after missing an emergency bond hearing, he was found in critical condition after trying to take his own life with carbon monoxide poisoning from his SUV's exhaust pipe. He was then rushed to Jacobi Medical Center and underwent hyperbaric oxygen therapy, but it was too late and he didn't survive. Unfortunately, he might have been the only person who knew what really happened to Jennifer. In January 2021, authorities searched a property owned by Fotis Real Estate Company, but sadly nothing was found. In May 2021, a domestic violence bill was signed into law named Jennifer's Law, which expands the definition of the crime to include coercive control. As for Michelle, she could be seen pleading with investigators during her interrogation, saying she had nothing to do with Jennifer's disappearance and didn't know what was in the bags they were dumping. During her trial in May of 2024, prosecutors told the jurors that Michelle was in on the plot to murder Jennifer and had answered his phone, which he left behind that day, in order to provide him with an alibi. The jury agreed, and she was found guilty of conspiring with Fotis to kill Jennifer and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. As for Jennifer, she has since been declared legally dead, but as of September 2024, her remains have not been found.